It's that tone in your text, just my name, then a dash, then call. I was laughing at something dumb till the flow of the day just fell off. Bad news on my phone, now the room feels 3 shades colder. All the clocks keep moving on, but my hands won't leave this shoulder. Oh, the shirt you wore last week, still hanging on my door. Bad news on my phone, and I don't know what to do with before. Every word like a stone in the mouth of the one who told. I said thanks just to say, 'cause there's nothing to fix what broke. Bad news on my phone, now the room feels 3 shades colder. All the clocks keep moving on, but my hands won't leave this shoulder of the shirt you wore last week, still hanging on my door. Bad news on my phone. Scroll in the dark, the glow on my face, words like broken glass cutting through my face. Every story screams, every picture pleads, but the quotes are cropped and the truth still bleeds. I'm drowning in these headlines in my hands.
Here is the uncomfortable truth behind the latest Hormuz drama. This is not only an energy story, it is a power story. When Washington and London talk about reopening the Strait of Hormuz, the real question is bigger than oil tankers. The real question is who is actually willing and able to protect the narrow passage that carries about 1/5 of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas. Reuters has been reporting that the United States is pressing allies to help secure the route, while some partners are hesitating, and that hesitation matters. Because global trade loves collective benefit, but in moments of danger it often falls back on very unequal responsibility. That is the deeper tension now. Everybody wants the ships to move, everybody wants prices to stay under control, but not everybody wants to carry the military, political, and financial cost of making that happen. And that turns Hormuz into more than a choke point. It becomes a live stress test of Western coordination, alliance credibility, and the old assumption that the sea lanes will somehow stay open because they always have before. There is also a hard economic lesson in this. Markets do not need a full blockade to get nervous. They only need to see that the system protecting trade is more fragile, more political, and more dependent on a shrinking number of actors than people thought. So yes, watch oil, watch freight, watch insurance. But also watch the coalition itself, because if the world's most important trade routes start depending on reluctant teamwork, then the risk premium is no longer just about the Middle East. It is about whether globalization still has a reliable navy behind it. And if that answer starts to look uncertain, the world gets more expensive long before it runs out of fuel.
You held your phone up like a mirror.
like glass. Red text yelling, market move, move fast. Maps glow, crimson borders, arrows, lines. One post whispers, done before it climbs. RadioTube news trading in my veins. Every little update tilts the frame. Shots and conflicts tangled on a screen, trying to buy calm in a wartime dream. RadioTube news can't look away. Price tags tied to a leader say. A world on fire and a thumbnail view. I'm chasing green in a sea so blue. Thumbprint logging, sleep still in my eyes. New flash briefing, peace talk, steep decline. Rumors flooding, comments like a storm. One sharp sentence breaks the old norm. Is it fear? Is it fate? Am I late? Am I bait? Every tick, every take, how much risk can I take? RadioTube news trading in my veins. Every little update tilts the frame. Charts and conflicts tangled on a screen, trying to buy calm in a wartime dream. RadioTube news can't look away. Price tags tied to
There is a big difference between a violent headline and a widening war, and this morning the tone coming out of the Middle East is pushing the story toward the second category. The latest missile strikes in southern Israel are serious on their own, but what really changes the atmosphere is the warning that the threat may be expanding, because that shifts the question from impact to duration. Once a conflict starts sounding open-ended, every calculation changes. Investors stop thinking in terms of one bad session and start thinking about weeks of pressure. Governments stop looking for quick messaging wins and start testing how much military, diplomatic, and economic stamina they may actually need. And businesses do the same thing, whether they are exposed through energy, shipping, insurance, or just plain consumer nerves. That is why this matters beyond the battlefield map. A longer clock means more chances for miscalculation, more opportunities for new actors to get pulled in, and more difficulty in putting the crisis back inside neat boundaries. It also means the market stops pricing a shock and starts pricing a condition. That is a much heavier idea, because conditions change behavior. Companies delay decisions, households get more cautious, and capital starts rewarding flexibility over confidence. The deeper issue here is that wars become harder to contain when the language around them stops sounding temporary. Once leaders prepare the public for expansion, even limited moves can be interpreted as part of a larger arc. So watch the next statements as closely as the next strikes, because in moments like this, rhetoric is not decoration, it is guidance. And when the language of crisis gets longer, the shadow it casts over everything else gets longer too.
You hold on like it's holy. I hold on like a habit I can't break. This is a terrible story. It's that tone in your text, just my name, then a dash, then call. I was laughing at something dumb, till the flow of the day just fell off. Bad news on my phone, now the room feels 3 shades colder. All the clocks keep moving on, but my hands won't leave this shoulder. Oh, the shirt you wore last week, still hanging on my door. Bad news on my phone, and I don't know what to do with before. Every word like a stone in the mouth of the one who told. I said thanks just to say, 'cause there's nothing to fix what broke. Bad news on my phone, now the room shades colder. All the clocks keep moving on, but my hands won't leave this shoulder of the shirt you wore last week. Still hanging on my door. Bad news on my phone, and I don't know what to do with before.
Here is the part of the Middle East story that people often miss. The first real economic damage does not have to begin with empty tankers. It can begin with hesitation. With shipowners rerouting, insurers repricing risk, and traders suddenly treating every cargo like a potential problem instead of a routine delivery. That is why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much right now. When Donald Trump and Iranian leaders trade threats, and when the wider war keeps expanding in tone, the market is not only asking whether the strait gets closed. It is asking whether the cost of moving through it starts rising long before any formal shutdown happens. And that distinction is crucial. A full blockade is the dramatic scenario, but friction is the more realistic one. Delays, higher insurance premiums, tighter security calculations, more nervous buyers, more cautious sellers. That is how a geopolitical crisis leaks into the real economy even before the worst-case headline arrives. Reuters has been reporting on both sides of this picture. On one hand, there are signals of possible restraint around energy infrastructure. On the other, there is still open confrontation around the region and the constant shadow of Hormuz. Put those together, and you get the real message of the moment. This is not peace. It is a struggle over whether the global energy system can stay functional while politics gets more dangerous. That matters far beyond oil traders. If shipping through the Gulf becomes less predictable, then inflation risk can reappear, industrial planning gets harder, and every country that depends on imported energy starts feeling a little less secure. The economic threat is not just scarcity. It is uncertainty. So watch the plumbing, not only the rhetoric. Because the world economy rarely breaks all at once. First it gets slower, pricier, and more fragile. And in a crisis like this, the most dangerous headline is the one that turns a shipping lane into a question mark.
Underground or airplane, doesn't matter in the end. I know it has to be this way, you're leaving me again. So write my little love song and sing it to the wind. You're out there on the road tonight, London, New York, Amsterdam. And I'm lonely here without you, miss your breath against my skin.
One of the more revealing moves on the board right now is not in oil, and not even in stocks. It is Bitcoin pushing higher while the broader emotional backdrop still looks deeply uneasy. And that matters, because Bitcoin usually gets punished fast when investors think the whole system is about to seize up. So when it rises during a geopolitical scare, the message is subtle but important. The market may be saying, this is dangerous, yes, but it is not yet being priced as a full financial heart attack. It looks more like a contained shock with a heavy risk premium, not a collapse in the plumbing of the global system. That distinction is everything. In a true panic, investors do not go hunting for volatile conviction trades. They grab cash, they hide in the safest instruments they can find, and they stop caring about upside. But if Bitcoin can stay firm while fear is still elevated, that tells you some capital is already leaning toward the next question, not just the current threat. And that next question is whether this whole episode becomes economically contagious. If attacks on energy infrastructure remain limited, if Hormuz does not turn into a lasting choke point, and if the oil shock keeps easing, then the appetite for risk can come back faster than the headlines might suggest. There is also a psychological layer here. Bitcoin often behaves like a lie detector for narrative confidence. When traders buy it into uncertainty, they are not saying the world is calm. They are saying they do not believe the worst case is becoming the base case. Now, that does not make this move safe. Crypto can reverse brutally if the region escalates again or if oil snaps higher on a fresh disruption. But for the moment, Bitcoin is acting less like a panic victim and more like an early vote for containment. And that is the real signal tonight, when the loudest fear is in the headlines but the bold money starts creeping back into risk. The market is no longer asking how bad this looks. It is asking how long the damage can really spread.
You said it's fine with your jaw clenched tight, fork in your hand, eyes on the floor, not mine. Burnt toast, cold wine, you laughed too loud at the wrong line. This is a terrible story, and we both know the ending by heart. Reading the same sad pages just to tear them apart. You hold on like it's holy, I hold on like a habit I can't break. This is a terrible story that we keep trying to remake. Your coat by the door for a whole heart, yeah. Suitcase half packed like a thread, like a souvenir.
If you want to understand why this crisis still feels so unstable, look north. Not at the oil chart, not at the latest relief bounce, but at the way the conflict keeps stretching sideways. Fresh reports of shrapnel falling in central Israel after an Iranian missile launch, and the identification of a victim from a Hezbollah strike near the northern border, are a reminder that wars do not need one dramatic breakthrough to get worse. Sometimes they get more dangerous simply by spreading their pressure across more ground. That matters because the northern front changes the character of the story. A conflict that might have been read as brutal but partly containable starts to look more layered, more emotional, and harder for any government to manage with precision. Once civilians in multiple areas are living under sirens, fragments, and cross-border fire, the room for patience gets smaller and the appetite for retaliation gets bigger. And this is where markets can fool themselves. Investors like neat narratives, escalation, then diplomacy, then relief. Real conflicts are messier. They can produce truce talks in one channel and fresh missile pressure in another. They can hint at de-escalation around energy infrastructure while simultaneously deepening the sense that the battlefield is no longer geographically tidy. That is the real risk here. The more fronts become active, the harder it is to control miscalculation. One commander, one strike, one casualty with political weight, and suddenly a conflict that looked manageable on paper becomes much harder to contain in practice. So yes, people will keep watching Gaza, Tehran, Washington, and Hormuz. But the northern front deserves more attention than it gets, because this is where a supposedly bounded crisis can quietly lose its borders. And in wars like this, the map does not change all at once. It changes one siren at a time.
Tonight it finally glares. Breaking news again. Another talking head. Same old story, friend. Wish I was in bed. Scrolling, scrolling.